The dust from the stagecoach wheels had barely settled when Dawson stepped down onto the cracked earth of Tascosa, Texas, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and the weight of 100 rejections on her shoulders. It was the summer of 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small cattle town that sat precariously between civilization and the wild frontier, a place where desperate people came to disappear or reinvent themselves, and Deanna was counting on the latter. She stood there for a moment, squinting against the harsh light, taking in the ramshackle buildings that lined the dusty Main Street. The Equity Bar stood at one end, its painted sign faded and peeling. Across from it, a general store with a sagging porch seemed to lean into the wind. This was the end of the line, quite literally. The stage driver had made that clear when he announced their arrival. Beyond Tascosa lay nothing but open range, and the occasional ranch scattered across thousands of acres of unforgiving land. Deanna was 22 years old, though she felt decades older. Her dark hair hung in a simple braid down her back, and her dress, once a respectable shade of blue, had faded to something closer to gray. She had left St. Louis 3 weeks ago, after her father's death had revealed debts she could never hope to repay. The creditors had taken the house, the furniture, everything. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father had never remarried. There were no siblings, no aunts or uncles, no one who might take her in. She had tried to find work in St. Louis, but every door had closed in her face. Too plain, they said. Too old to be unmarried. No references, no family. The whispers had followed her everywhere, the speculation about why a woman her age remained unwed. There must be something wrong with her, they said. Some hidden flaw that made her unmarriable. The final blow had come from Mrs. Henderson, a wealthy widow who ran a boarding house for respectable young women. Deanna had stood in her parlor, hat in hand, hoping for any position, even as a scullery maid. Mrs. Henderson had looked her up and down with cold eyes and said the words that still echoed in Deanna's mind. "My dear, you must understand. A woman of your age, unmarried with no prospects and no connections. I'm afraid nobody wants someone like you under their roof. You bring bad luck, and frankly, bad reputation." Those words had driven her west, following a slim advertisement in the newspaper about opportunities in the frontier towns of Texas. She had spent the last of her money on the stage-coach ticket, gambling everything on the hope that distance might outrun shame. Now, standing in the dusty street of Tascosa, Deanna felt that familiar ache of rejection settling in her chest. The other passengers had already dispersed, claimed by waiting family or heading purposefully toward known destinations. Only she remained, uncertain and alone. "You looking for work or trouble?" A woman's voice cut through her thoughts. Deanna turned to see a tall, handsome woman in her 40s standing in the doorway of what appeared to be a restaurant. Her hair was swept up in a practical bun, and her apron was stained with what looked like flour. "Work," Deanna said quickly. "Any kind of work." The woman studied her for a long moment. "You know how to cook?" "Yes, madam, and clean and sew and keep accounts." "Nobody calls me madam. Name's Ruth McCarthy. I run the boarding house and restaurant." She jerked her thumb behind her. "Lost my cook's helper last week." Girl ran off with a ranch hand. "Can you start today?" Deanna felt a surge of hope so strong it nearly knocked her over. "Yes, absolutely. Pays not much. Room and board plus $3 a week. You'll work breakfast through dinner 6 days a week. Sunday afternoons are your own after the noon meal's cleaned up." "That's more than fair," Deanna said, and she meant it. It was more than she had dared to hope for. Ruth nodded, already turning back inside. "Bring your bag." "I'll show you to your room," then you can help me with the dinner preparations. We get about 20 men coming through here most evenings. Ranchers, cowboys, drifters. You'll need to develop a thick skin and a quick tongue if you want to survive." Deanna followed her into the building, which was larger than it appeared from the outside. The front room held a dozen tables with mismatched chairs. The smell of cooking meat and fresh bread filled the air, making Deanna's stomach growl. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. "Kitchen's through here," Ruth continued, leading her through a swinging door. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the left. Drop your bag and come right back down. We've got 20 hungry men showing up in 2 hours, and I need to teach you how we do things here." The room upstairs was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the main street. Deanna set her carpetbag on the bed and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to absorb the fact that she had a place to stay, a job, and the possibility of a future. Then she splashed water on her face from the basin, smoothed her hair, and hurried back downstairs. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of instruction. Ruth showed her where everything was kept, how much food to prepare, how to stretch the expensive ingredients without sacrificing flavor. Deanna absorbed it all, grateful for something to focus on besides her own anxiety. Her hands remembered the motions from helping her father's housekeeper years ago, before his business had started failing and they had to let the staff go. The first cowboys started arriving just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. They came in groups of 2s and 3s, dusty and tired from long days working cattle on the nearby ranches. They hung their hats on pegs by the door and found their usual tables, calling out greetings to Ruth and eyeing Deanna with undisguised curiosity. "New girl." One of them asked Ruth as she carried out plates of beef and potatoes. "New helper," Ruth corrected firmly, "and you'll treat her with respect or find somewhere else to eat." The man raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just asking, Ruth, just asking." Deanna focused on her work, carrying plates and refilling coffee cups, trying to ignore the stares and whispered comments. She was used to being looked at and found wanting. At least here, they were looking at her as a curiosity rather than a failure. The evening was nearly over, the last stragglers finishing their meals, when the door opened and a man walked in who seemed to change the very air in the room. Deanna was clearing a table near the back and glanced up out of habit. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of a man who spent his life working hard under the open sky. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and hung a bit longer than was fashionable, curling slightly at his collar. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, even from across the room. They were a striking shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the prairie, and they held an intensity that made her breath catch. "Jackson," Ruth called out warmly. "Running late tonight." "Cattle got loose through a break in the fence," the man said, his voice deep and slightly rough. "Took us most of the afternoon to round them up." He removed his hat, revealing more of that dark hair, and his eyes scanned the room before landing on Deanna. She looked away quickly, returning her attention to the dishes she was stacking, but she could feel his gaze on her like a physical touch. "You still got anything left to eat?" Jackson asked Ruth, but Deanna noticed he hadn't taken his eyes off her. "For you, always." "Deanna, bring Mr. Parker a plate when you come back from the kitchen." Deanna nodded, carrying her stack of dishes through the swinging door. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she couldn't explain why. She had been looked at by dozens of men tonight, but none of them had affected her like this. "That's Jackson Parker," Ruth said, appearing beside her at the sink. "Owns the Double P Ranch about 5 miles north of town. Good man. Fair to his workers, pays his bills on time, doesn't start trouble. She paused, giving Diana a knowing look. Also single, in case you were wondering. I wasn't, Diana said quickly, too quickly. Ruth laughed. Sure you weren't. Here, take him this plate. Biggest piece of beef and extra potatoes. Jackson works harder than any 3 men combined. Diana arranged the plate carefully, added a fresh cup of coffee, and carried it out to the table where Jackson had settled. Most of the other diners had left now, and the large room felt suddenly intimate with only a handful of people remaining. Thank you, Jackson said as she set the plate in front of him. His voice was gentler than she expected, and when she finally met his eyes, she saw kindness there along with that intensity. You're welcome, Mr. Parker. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. You just get into town. She turned back, surprised he was continuing the conversation. This afternoon, on the stage. From where? St. Louis. He nodded slowly, cutting into his beef. Long journey. What brings you all the way out here? Diana hesitated. She had practiced various answers to this question during the long stage-coach ride, but standing here in front of this man with his storm cloud eyes, all her prepared responses fled her mind. I needed a fresh start, she finally said, which was both completely true and entirely inadequate. Well, Tascosa's a good place for that, Jackson said. Out here, nobody much cares who you were or where you came from. Only thing that matters is who you are and what you're willing to work for. Something in his words made Diana's throat tighten. I hope you're right. I usually am, he said, and there was the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Not arrogant, just confident. I'm Jackson Parker, but Ruth already told you that. Diana Dawson. Pleased to meet you, Miss Dawson. He returned his attention to his meal, and Diana retreated to the kitchen, her heart beating faster than it had any right to. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Diana rose before dawn to help Ruth prepare breakfast for the early ranch hands heading out to work. They served the noon meal to whoever was in town for supplies or business. Then came the dinner rush, when the restaurant filled with hungry men grateful for a hot meal and a brief respite from the endless work of cattle ranching. Diana learned quickly that Tascosa was a town balanced on the edge of survival. The cattle drives that passed through provided most of the income for the businesses along the main street. The ranches scattered across the surrounding territory provided the rest. When the cattle industry prospered, so did Tascosa. When it struggled, the town struggled too. Jackson Parker came to dinner every evening, always arriving just after the main rush had passed. He sat at the same table by the window and ate his meal quietly, occasionally exchanging words with Ruth or the other regular customers. But Diana noticed that his eyes followed her as she moved around the room, and more than once she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. On her second Sunday in Tascosa, with her afternoon free after the noon cleanup was finished, Diana decided to explore the town properly. It didn't take long. Besides Ruth's boarding house and restaurant, there was the general store, the equity bar, a blacksmith shop, a small church, and a handful of other businesses serving the needs of the ranchers and cowboys who passed through. She was standing outside the general store, debating whether to spend a few precious coins on writing paper to send a letter to an old friend in St. Louis, when a voice behind her made her jump. Miss Dawson. She turned to find Jackson Parker standing a few feet away, holding his hat in his hands. Up close, in the bright afternoon sunlight, she could see details she had missed in the dimmer light of the restaurant. The fine lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting against the sun. A small scar on his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead when it wasn't contained by his hat. Mr. Parker, she said, trying to calm her suddenly racing heart. "I didn't expect to see anyone I knew out here. It's a small town," he said. "You meet everyone eventually, usually more often than you'd like." He paused, and she saw him take a breath, as if gathering courage. "I was wondering if you might like to take a walk. I could show you some of the prettier spots around town. Not that there are many, but the creek's nice this time of year." Deanna hesitated. She had been in Tascosa for less than 2 weeks. She barely knew this man, despite seeing him every evening. But something in his eyes, some genuine kindness mixed with nervousness, made her want to say yes. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. The relief that flooded Jackson's face was almost comical. "Good. That's good." He offered her his arm in a gesture so old-fashioned and gentlemanly that it made her smile. They walked down the main street and then cut between two buildings, following a worn path that led away from the town. Jackson pointed out landmarks as they went, his deep voice a pleasant counterpoint to the afternoon sounds of insects and distant cattle. "Been in Tascosa long?" Deanna asked as they walked. 5 years. Came here from Kansas with enough money to buy land and start a herd. Been building it up ever since." He glanced at her. "It's hard work, ranching, especially out here where the water's scarce and the weather can turn on you in a heartbeat. But it's mine, you know. Every acre, every head of cattle, every fence post. Built it with my own hands and the help of good men willing to work hard." "That must be satisfying," Deanna said softly. "It is, but it's lonely too." The words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised her. "Sorry. Didn't mean to say that. It's all right." Deanna found herself wanting to comfort him. "I understand loneliness." They had reached the creek, a thin ribbon of water cutting through the dry landscape. A few cottonwood trees clustered along its banks, providing rare shade. Jackson led her to a smooth boulder near the water's edge, and they sat down together, maintaining a respectful distance. "Can I ask you something?" Jackson said after a moment of comfortable silence. "Of course. Why did you really come to Tascosa?" "I don't mean to pry, but I get the feeling there's more to it than just wanting a fresh start." Deanna stared at the water, watching it flow over the rocks. She could give him a polite deflection, keep her pain and shame private. But something about this place, this moment, this man made her want to tell the truth. "My father died 3 months ago," she began. "He left debts I couldn't pay. I lost everything. The house, all our possessions, everything. I tried to find work in St. Louis, but nobody would hire me. I'm 22 and unmarried, which apparently makes me suspicious. Too old to be respectable, too young to be a widow, and with no family to vouch for my character." She paused, the familiar ache of rejection rising in her chest. "The last woman I asked for work, she looked at me like I was something distasteful she had found on her shoe. She told me nobody wants someone like me." The words hung in the air between them. Deanna felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She refused to cry in front of this man she barely knew. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," Jackson said, his voice rough with anger. Not at her, she realized, but on her behalf. "Nobody wants you. That woman was a fool." Deanna turned to look at him and found his gray-blue eyes blazing with an intensity that took her breath away. "I do," Jackson said, and the words seemed to cost him something. "Want you, I mean, and that's all that matters." The world seemed to stop spinning. Deanna stared at him, unable to form words, unable to process what he had just said. The creek burbled on behind them. A bird called from one of the cottonwood trees. And Jackson Parker, this man she had known for less than 2 weeks, looked at her like she was something precious and rare. "You don't know me," Deanna finally managed to say. "I know enough. I know you work hard. I know you're kind to the customers even when they don't deserve it. I know you've been through hell and came out the other side still willing to try. I know that when you smile, which isn't often enough, it lights up the whole room." He took a breath. "I know I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you walked into Ruth's restaurant. Mr. Parker, Jackson, please, Jackson." His name felt right in her mouth. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make any promises. I just wanted you to know that you're wrong. What that woman told you was cruel and untrue. You're wanted. You're valuable. And anyone who can't see that is blind." Tears did fall then, sliding down Deanna's cheeks before she could stop them. But they weren't tears of sadness or shame. They were tears of relief, of release, of something breaking open inside her chest that had been locked tight for so long. Jackson reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped the tears from her face with his thumb. His hand was calloused and rough from work, but his touch was impossibly gentle. "I'm sorry," Deanna said, laughing a little through her tears. "This is mortifying. Don't be sorry. Don't ever be sorry for feeling things." Jackson's hand lingered on her cheek for a moment before he pulled it back. "I meant what I said, Deanna. All of it." They sat by the creek for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. Jackson told her about his ranch, about the struggles and triumphs of building something from nothing. Deanna found herself opening up about her childhood, the good years before her father's business started failing, her mother's death, the slow descent into poverty and desperation. When the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Jackson walked her back to town. At the door of Ruth's boarding house, he paused. "Can I see you again? Properly, I mean. Not just when I come in for dinner." "I'd like that," Deanna said, and realized she meant it completely. "Next Sunday. Maybe we could pack a picnic, ride out to the ranch. I'd like to show you the place." "I don't know how to ride." Jackson grinned, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and almost boyish. "I'll teach you. I've got a gentle mare that would be perfect for a beginner." "All right," Deanna said, feeling a flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach. "Next Sunday." That week passed both too quickly and too slowly. Deanna threw herself into her work, but her mind kept drifting to Sunday, to Jackson, to the feeling of his hand on her cheek, and the intensity in his eyes when he said he wanted her. Ruth noticed, of course. "You're humming," she commented on Thursday evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Am I?" Deanna tried to sound innocent. "You are, and you've got a look about you. Same look that girl who ran off with the ranch hand had, come to think of it." Ruth studied her with sharp eyes. "Jackson Parker's a good man, Deanna, one of the best I've known, but ranching is a hard life. You'd be signing up for years of struggle if you went down that path." "I'm not going down any path," Deanna protested. "We've barely spent time together." "Maybe not yet, but I see how he looks at you. And more importantly, I see how you look at him when you think nobody's watching." Ruth's expression softened. "I'm not warning you off. I'm just saying go into it with your eyes open. Life out here isn't like life back east. It's harder, rougher, and there are fewer comforts, but there's a freedom to it too if you're brave enough to reach for it." Sunday arrived bright and clear, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to stretch on forever. Deanna dressed in her most practical clothing, which wasn't saying much given her limited wardrobe. Ruth had lent her a split riding skirt, insisting that she couldn't learn to ride in a regular dress. Jackson arrived at noon with 2 horses, both already saddled. One was a large bay gelding that moved with barely contained energy. The other was a smaller chestnut mare with a gentle eye and a calm demeanor. "This is Daisy," Jackson said, stroking the mare's neck. "She's 15 years old and the sweetest horse I've ever known. She'll take care of you." For the next hour, Jackson patiently taught Deanna the basics of riding. How to mount, how to hold the reins, how to sit in the saddle and move with the horse rather than against it. He was patient and encouraging, never making her feel foolish for her inexperience. Finally, when Deanna felt reasonably confident that she wouldn't fall off immediately, they set out toward Jackson's ranch. The ride was slow, accommodating Diana's beginner status, but she didn't mind. The landscape around them was stark and beautiful in its own way. Rolling prairie stretched in every direction, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings and the dark green lines of creek beds where trees clustered. The Double P Ranch house came into view after about an hour of riding. It was a simple structure, built from wood hauled in from who knows where, with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. Behind it stood a barn, several corrals, and a few smaller outbuildings. "It's not much," Jackson said, and Deanna heard uncertainty in his voice. "But it's solid. Built to last." "It's wonderful," Deanna said honestly. There was something appealing about the simple practicality of it, the way it sat comfortably in the landscape as if it had grown there naturally. Jackson helped her down from Daisy, his hand strong and steady on her waist. For a moment, they stood close together, and Diana felt the heat radiating from his body in the afternoon sun. Then he stepped back, grabbing the picnic basket he had brought. "Come on. There's a spot I want to show you." He led her behind the house to where the land sloped down toward a creek, the same one they had sat by the previous Sunday but further upstream. Here, the water pooled in a wider basin, and the cottonwood trees grew thicker, creating a shaded oasis in the sun-baked landscape. They spread a blanket under the trees and unpacked the food Jackson had brought. Bread, cheese, cold chicken, and apples. Simple fare, but after the morning's riding, it tasted like a feast. "Who usually does the cooking for you?" Deanna asked between bites. "I do, mostly. I've got 3 men who work for me full-time, and they rotate cooking duties in the bunkhouse. But I like cooking for myself. Gives me time to think." He paused. "Gets lonely, though, eating alone every night." "Is that why you come into town for dinner?" "Partly. Also because Ruth's cooking is better than mine and I like having people around." He met her eyes. "Though lately, I've had another reason for coming to town." Deanna felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "Jackson, I need to be honest with you about something." "All right. I've never been courted before. I don't know how to do this, whatever this is. I've never even been kissed." The admission felt both embarrassing and liberating. Back in St. Louis, the men who might have been interested in me when I was younger lost interest when my father's business started failing. By the time I was 20, I was considered a lost cause. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Deanna, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to believe me. Those men were fools, every single one of them. They missed out on knowing someone extraordinary. You barely know me, I know enough, and I want to know more. Everything. Your favorite color, what makes you laugh, what you dream about when you let yourself dream." He shifted closer on the blanket. "As for the courting part, we'll figure it out together. I'm not exactly experienced myself. Spent most of my adult life building this ranch, didn't have much time for socializing." "Really?" Deanna found that hard to believe. Jackson was handsome, successful, kind. Surely women had shown interest. "Really? There were a couple of girls in Kansas before I came here, but nothing serious. And since I've been in Tascosa, I've been too busy trying to keep the ranch afloat to think much about romance." He smiled. "Until you stepped off that stagecoach." They talked through the afternoon, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Jackson told her about his childhood in Kansas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 19, about the burning need to build something of his own that had driven him to Texas. Deanna shared more about her life in St. Louis. The gradual realization that her father's drinking was destroying his business, the fear and shame of watching their social standing crumble. The sun was beginning its descent when Jackson finally said, "I should get you back to town before Ruth sends out a search party." They packed up the remains of the picnic and walked back to where the horses were grazing peacefully. Jackson helped Diana mount Daisy, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than strictly necessary. The ride back to Tascosa was even slower than the ride out, as if both of them were reluctant for the day to end. The sun painted the prairie in shades of gold and amber, and the heat of the day gave way to the cooler evening air. At the boarding house, Jackson helped Deanna down from the saddle once more. They stood close together in the fading light, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "Thank you for today," Deanna said softly. "It was wonderful. The first of many, I hope." Jackson reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. "Can I see you next Sunday?" "Yes, and the Sunday after that and the one after that." Jackson's smile was like sunrise. "I was hoping you'd say that." He hesitated, then leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away. His lips brushed her forehead in the gentlest of kisses. "Good night, Deanna. Good night, Jackson." She watched him ride away into the gathering dusk, her heart full of something she was afraid to name but couldn't deny. The weeks that followed established a pattern that became the rhythm of Deanna's new life. She worked 6 days a week at the restaurant, serving meals to the cowboys and ranchers who passed through Tascosa. Jackson came in every evening for dinner, and though they kept their interactions brief and proper under Ruth's knowing eye, every look, every accidental touch, felt charged with meaning. Sundays became precious. Jackson would arrive at noon, and they would ride out to the ranch or explore the countryside around Tascosa. Sometimes they talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, content just to be near each other. Jackson taught Diana to ride with increasing confidence, and she taught him about books and music, things he had little exposure to growing up on the frontier. One Sunday in late August, about 6 weeks after Diana had arrived in Tascosa, they were sitting by the creek on Jackson's property when he asked, "What do you think of Texas? Is it what you expected?" Deanna considered the question carefully. "It's harsher than I imagined. The heat, the dust, the endless sky, but it's also more beautiful. There's something about the openness of it, the way you can see for miles in every direction. It makes me feel small and significant at the same time. You miss St. Louis? Sometimes I miss the ease of it. Running water, proper stores, theaters, and concerts. But I don't miss the judgment, the constant feeling that I wasn't good enough. Here, people take me as I am." "You're more than good enough," Jackson said fiercely. "You're extraordinary." Deanna felt her cheeks flush. Even after weeks of his compliments and kind words, she still wasn't used to being seen this way. "Jackson, can I ask you something? Anything? Where is this going? Between us, I mean." She twisted her hands in her lap, nervous. "I care about you, more than I've ever cared about anyone. But I need to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling." Jackson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and intense. "I'm falling in love with you, Deanna. Actually, I'm not falling. I've already fallen. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you bite your lip when you're thinking hard about something. I love how you treat every person who walks into that restaurant with dignity, even the ones who don't deserve it. I love your laugh, which I don't hear often enough, and the way you look at the prairie like it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen." Diana's breath caught in her chest. "Jackson, let me finish. I know it hasn't been long. I know by society's standards, we should court for a proper amount of time before declaring feelings. But out here, time moves different. Life's too hard and too uncertain to waste it pretending we don't feel what we feel. He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. I love you, Deanna Dawson. And I want to marry you if you'll have me. I want to build a life with you here on this ranch. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to face whatever comes, good or bad, with you by my side. Tears streamed down Deanna's face, but she was smiling, a genuine, joyful smile that felt like it might split her face in two. I love you too. I've been so afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or too much or that I was being foolish. But I love you, Jackson Parker. I love your gentleness and your strength. I love how hard you work and how much you care about doing things right. I love the way you look at me like I'm something precious. And yes, I'll marry you. Nothing would make me happier. Jackson let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob of relief. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Can I kiss you? Properly this time, please. He leaned in slowly, and when his lips met hers, it was like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning this new language of physical affection. Then it deepened, becoming something more passionate, more certain. Deanna's hands came up to rest on Jackson's chest, feeling his heart pounding as hard as her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. I don't have a ring yet. I'll go to the general store tomorrow, see if they have anything suitable. And we'll need to talk to the preacher about a wedding date. And I should probably ask Ruth for her blessing, since she's the closest thing you have to family here. Deanna laughed, a sound of pure joy. We'll figure it all out. Together. They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, making plans and dreaming out loud about their future. Jackson wanted to expand the ranch, add more cattle, maybe build a bigger house eventually. Deanna talked about making the ranch house a real home, about planting a garden, about the children she hoped they would have someday. When Jackson finally took her back to town, they rode side by side, their hands occasionally brushing as Daisy kept pace with Jackson's gelding. At the boarding house, Jackson helped Deanna down from the saddle and then, right there on the main street of Tascosa where anyone could see, he kissed her again. It was a declaration, a promise, a statement to the world that they belonged to each other. Ruth was waiting in the restaurant when Deanna came inside, her arms crossed but her eyes twinkling. Well, we're getting married, Deanna said, and the words felt like magic. Ruth whooped and pulled Deanna into a tight hug. About damn time. That man's been mooning over you since day one. When's the wedding? We haven't set a date yet. Make it soon. I've seen the way you two look at each other. No point waiting when you're both sure. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Jackson bought a simple gold band from the general store, apologizing that it wasn't fancier. Deanna loved it, loved that it was practical and sturdy, meant for a life of work rather than ornament. They set the wedding date for the first Sunday in October, giving them about 6 weeks to prepare. Deanna made herself a wedding dress from fabric purchased at the general store, working on it late at night after the restaurant closed. It was simple, made from cream-colored cotton, but she embroidered flowers around the neckline and hem, pouring her hopes and dreams into every stitch. Jackson spent his free time preparing the ranch house for Deanna's arrival. He built new furniture for the bedroom, refinished the floors, and made sure everything was clean and welcoming. His ranch hands teased him mercilessly about his upcoming nuptials, but Jackson took it all in stride, too happy to care about ribbing. The Saturday before the wedding, a complication arrived in the form of a letter. The mail came irregularly to Tascosa, brought by riders from the larger towns, and Deanna had long ago stopped expecting anything addressed to her. So she was surprised when the postmaster flagged her down as she walked to work, holding out an envelope with her name on it. The handwriting was familiar. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner from St. Louis who had rejected her so cruelly. Deanna almost threw the letter away unread, but curiosity got the better of her. The letter was 2 pages long, written in Mrs. Henderson's precise script. She had heard, through mutual acquaintances, that Diana had gone west. She wanted to apologize for her harsh words, which she now claimed were spoken in haste and stress. One of her long-term residents had recently married and moved out, leaving her short-staffed. She was willing to offer Deanna a position as assistant manager, with good pay and a nice room. She hoped Deanna would consider returning to St. Louis where she belonged. Deanna read the letter twice, trying to summon some feeling about it. Anger, perhaps, or vindication. But all she felt was a distant sort of pity. Mrs. Henderson thought she was offering Deanna salvation, a chance to return to civilization. She had no idea that Deanna had found something far more valuable in the rough frontier town of Tascosa. That evening, when Jackson came in for dinner, Deanna showed him the letter. He read it silently, his jaw tightening. "You want to go back?" he asked finally, and she heard the fear under the careful neutrality of his tone. "No," Deanna said firmly. "Not even for a moment. My life is here now." "With you?" The relief on Jackson's face was profound. "Good, because I don't think I could let you go, even if you wanted to. I'd probably follow you to St. Louis and make a fool of myself trying to win you back." Deanna laughed and kissed his cheek, not caring that they were in full view of the other dinner customers. "You'll never have to. I'm yours, Jackson, completely." The wedding day arrived with perfect autumn weather. The brutal heat of summer had broken, and the air held a crisp quality that made everything feel fresh and new. Deanna dressed in her handmade wedding gown, her hands shaking slightly as she buttoned the front. Ruth helped her arrange her hair, weaving in wildflowers that Jackson had picked the day before. "You look beautiful," Ruth said, her voice suspiciously thick. "Jackson's not going to know what hit him." The wedding was held in the small church at the end of Tascosa's main street. Nearly the entire town turned out, cramming into the small space. Deanna was touched by how many people came, ranchers and cowboys and shopkeepers, who had known her for only a few months but treated her like she had always been one of them. Then Jackson entered from the side door, and Deanna forgot about everyone else. He wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was the expression in his eyes when he saw her that stole her breath. He looked at her like she was the sun and moon and stars, like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. The ceremony itself was brief, the preacher keeping his words simple and heartfelt. Deanna barely heard them, too focused on Jackson's hands holding hers, on the way his voice shook slightly when he said his vows, on the overwhelming feeling of rightness that washed over her when the preacher finally said, "You may kiss your bride." Jackson kissed her like he was sealing a promise, and the small church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration afterward was held at Ruth's restaurant, which had been decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. There was food and music, with one of the ranch hands producing a fiddle and playing lively tunes that got people dancing. Deanna danced with Jackson, his arm strong around her waist, and felt like she was floating. As the sun began to set, Jackson leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Parker?" The name sent a thrill through her. Yes. They slipped away from the celebration, riding out to the ranch under the first stars of evening. Jackson had strung lanterns on the porch, creating a warm glow that welcomed them home. He helped Deanna down from Daisy, then swept her up in his arms, carrying her over the threshold despite her laughing protests. Inside, the house glowed with more lanterns. Jackson set Deanna down gently, and for a moment, they simply stood together in the main room, the weight and wonder of the day settling over them. "I love you," Jackson said, framing her face with his hands. "I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "I love you too," Deanna whispered. "Thank you for wanting me when nobody else did." "Their loss," Jackson said firmly. "My gain, the greatest gain of my life." He kissed her again, and Diana felt the last walls around her heart crumble completely. She was wanted, she was loved, she was home. That night, in the bedroom Jackson had so carefully prepared, they came together with a mix of nervousness and tenderness that gradually gave way to passion and joy. Jackson was patient and gentle, showing Diana with his hands and his body what his words had already told her. She was precious to him, treasured, loved beyond measure. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Jackson's arms around her and the sound of the prairie wind outside, Diana thought about the journey that had brought her here. All the rejection, all the pain, all the fear had led to this moment. She would not have chosen that path if given the option, but she could not regret it now, because it had brought her to Jackson. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson murmured, his lips against her hair. "How glad I am that I got on that stage coach to Texas. I thank God for it every day." He pulled her closer. "Sleep now, love. Tomorrow our real life begins." The months that followed were not easy, but they were good. Deanna learned the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of work that kept the cattle healthy and the ranch running. She cooked and cleaned and kept the account books, stretching their resources to cover expenses and save for future investments. She planted a garden near the house, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. Jackson worked from dawn to dusk, managing the cattle and maintaining the property. But no matter how tired he was, he always made time for Deanna, always made sure she knew she was loved and valued. They talked while doing chores, shared quiet evenings reading by lamplight, and made love with increasing confidence and joy. The first real test of their marriage came in February, when a brutal winter storm swept across the prairie. For 3 days, snow fell in blinding sheets, driven by winds that howled around the house like living things. Jackson and his ranch hands worked around the clock to save the cattle, to break through ice so they could reach water, to pull animals from snowdrifts. Diana kept the house warm and the coffee hot, making huge batches of food to fuel the men as they staggered in for brief breaks. She worried every time Jackson went back out into the storm, terrified that he would not return. But each time he came back to her, ice crusting his hat and coat, his face red with cold but alive. When the storm finally broke, they had lost 15 head of cattle, a significant blow to their finances. Jackson was devastated, blaming himself for not preparing better. Deanna held him that night as he grieved, reminding him that some things were beyond human control, that they would recover together. And they did. Spring came, bringing new calves and new hope. The cattle herd grew, and with careful management, they were able to sell at good prices when the buyers came through in the fall. Jackson hired a 4th ranch hand, a young man named Tommy who had drifted into Tascosa looking for work. By their first anniversary, the ranch was on solid financial footing, and Diana had news that made her almost giddy with excitement. She waited until the evening, until Jackson had finished his work and they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, before she told him, "Jackson, I'm pregnant." He turned to stare at her, his eyes wide. "What? I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby, around May, I think." For a moment, Jackson just stared at her. Then he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to town, sweeping Deanna up in his arms and spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he kept saying. We're having a baby. Are you happy? Deanna asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, yes. Thrilled, absolutely. But Deanna, this is everything. You're everything. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Deanna continued working as long as she could, though Ruth insisted she slow down and eventually stop coming to the restaurant entirely. Jackson fussed over her constantly, worried about every little thing, until Deanna had to gently but firmly tell him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was not made of glass. In late May, as the prairie burst into bloom with wildflowers, Deanna went into labor. Ruth came out to the ranch to serve as midwife, having delivered dozens of babies over her years in Tascosa. Jackson paced outside the bedroom, wearing a track in the floorboards, until finally Ruth opened the door and beckoned him in. Deanna lay in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Jackson approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and, as Jackson watched, opened his eyes to reveal a stormy gray-blue that matched his father's. "He's perfect," Jackson breathed. "Deanna, he's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Deanna asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, never quite settling on one. But looking at his son now, Jackson knew. "Joseph, after my father." "Joseph Parker," Deanna said, testing the name. "I like it." Jackson sat carefully on the edge of the bed, putting his arm around Deanna and looking down at their son. "How did we get so lucky?" "I don't know," Deanna said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "But I'm grateful every day." Life with a baby was harder than Deanna had imagined. Joseph was a healthy, hungry child who demanded attention at all hours. Deanna spent her days in a blur of feedings and diaper changes, and trying to grab sleep whenever Joseph napped. Jackson helped as much as he could, pacing the floor with a crying baby at night, changing diapers without complaint, and constantly reassuring Deanna that she was doing a wonderful job. The ranch hands, rough cowboys all, were surprisingly gentle with the baby. They took turns sitting on the porch after dinner, holding Joseph and telling him stories about cattle drives and the open range. Deanna would watch through the window, her heart full, thinking about how this rough frontier life was shaping her son. Joseph was 6 months old when a drought hit. The usual summer rains failed to materialize, and the creeks began to dry up. The grass turned brown and brittle, and the cattle grew thin. Jackson spent long days riding the property, moving cattle to where there was still grazing, hauling water from the few remaining water sources. It was the hardest year they had faced, and the strain showed on both of them. Deanna worried constantly about money, about whether they would have to sell cattle at a loss just to keep them from dying. Jackson grew quieter, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. One night in late August, Deanna found him sitting on the porch steps after dinner, his head in his hands. She sat down beside him, careful not to jostle Joseph, who was sleeping against her shoulder. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said gently. "I'm thinking I brought you to a hard life," Jackson said, his voice rough. "I promised you a home, a future, but I can't even guarantee we'll have enough water to keep the cattle alive." "Jackson Parker, look at me." Deanna waited until he raised his head. "I didn't marry you for guarantees. I married you because I love you, because you're the best man I've ever known. Yes, this is hard. Yes, I'm scared sometimes, but I'm scared with you, and that makes all the difference. I just want to give you everything. You already have. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me this beautiful baby and a life full of purpose. That's everything, Jackson. The rest is just details." He pulled her close, careful of the baby between them, and buried his face in her hair. "I love you so much. I love you too. And we'll get through this, just like we've gotten through everything else." And they did. The drought eventually broke in September with a series of violent thunderstorms that turned the dry creeks into rushing torrents overnight. The grass greened up, the cattle recovered, and by the time they sold in the fall, the herd was healthy enough to fetch decent prices. The years that followed brought their share of challenges and triumphs. There were good years when the rains came on time and the cattle prices were high, and lean years when they had to carefully ration every resource. Deanna had 2 more children, a daughter named Grace when Joseph was 3, and another son named Samuel 2 years after that. The ranch house was expanded, growing to accommodate their family. Jackson and his men added rooms, built a proper barn, dug a well that provided reliable water even in dry years. Diana's garden flourished, providing vegetables that she canned and preserved for winter. She kept chickens and learned to make butter and cheese, becoming increasingly self-sufficient. Joseph grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ranching business from the ground up. Grace was a firecracker, fearless and bold, climbing trees and riding horses almost before she could walk. Samuel was the peacemaker, gentle and kind, with a gift for gentling difficult animals. On their 10th anniversary, Jackson surprised Deanna by taking her back to the creek where he had first told her he loved her. They left the children with Ruth, who had become a doting honorary grandmother, and rode out to the ranch in the early morning. "Remember this spot?" Jackson asked as they dismounted. "How could I forget? This is where you told me I was wanted. And you are, more every day." Jackson pulled a small box from his pocket. "I never got to give you a proper engagement ring. I want to remedy that now." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small diamond. It was not ostentatious or fancy, but it was beautiful. "Jackson, when did you? I've been saving for it for years. Wanted to get you something that represented everything you mean to me." He took her left hand, where her plain gold wedding band still circled her finger. "This doesn't replace that. Your wedding ring stays where it is, but I wanted you to have something that sparkles like you deserve." Deanna was crying as Jackson slipped the ring onto her finger, positioning it just above her wedding band. "It's beautiful. You're beautiful. This whole life we've built is beautiful." They sat by the creek for hours, talking about the journey that had brought them here. 10 years of marriage, 3 children, a thriving ranch, and a love that had only deepened with time and trials. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed in St. Louis?" Jackson asked. Diana considered the question. "Sometimes. I'd probably be working as a companion to some wealthy widow, or maybe as a governess. Respectable but lonely, always on the edges of other people's lives, never quite belonging. I hate that woman who told you nobody wanted you." "I don't," Deanna said thoughtfully. "If she hadn't said that, I might not have been desperate enough to come to Texas. And then I never would have met you. So in a strange way, her cruelty gave me the greatest gift of my life." Jackson pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Everything happens for a reason, I suppose. I used to think that was just something people said to make themselves feel better about bad things. But now I think it might be true. All those closed doors in St. Louis forced me toward the one door that was open, the one that led me here to you." They returned to the ranch house as the sun began to set, riding side by side as they had done so many times over the years. The house glowed with lamplight, and they could see their children playing in the yard, chasing lightning bugs in the gathering dusk. "This is what happiness looks like," Deanna said softly. "Yes," Jackson agreed. Yes, it is. The children ran to greet them as they dismounted, all talking at once about their day with Ruth, about the treats she had given them, about the stories she had told. Jackson and Deanna exchanged amused glances over their heads, both thinking the same thing. They were blessed beyond measure. That night, after the children were tucked into bed, Jackson and Deanna sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. This had become their ritual over the years, these quiet evening moments where they could reconnect after the busyness of the day. "What are you thinking about?" Deanna asked, her hand in Jackson's. "How grateful I am. For you, for our children, for this life we've built together. There were times when I thought I'd spend my whole life alone out here, just me and the cattle and the endless sky. And then you stepped off that stagecoach and everything changed. Best decision I ever made, getting on that stage." "Second best," Jackson corrected with a smile. "The best decision was saying yes when I asked you to marry me." Deanna laughed. "You're right. That was the best decision." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Closer to the house, the horses nickered softly in the barn. "Deanna," Jackson said eventually, "I want to make sure you know something." "What's that?" "You saved me. Just as much as I saved you, maybe more. I was becoming hard out here, focused on nothing but survival and building the ranch. I was forgetting how to feel, how to connect with people. You reminded me that life is about more than work. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, a legacy to pass on to our children. You made me whole." Deanna turned to look at him, seeing the sincerity in his storm cloud eyes. "We saved each other then. That seems fair. More than fair. Perfect, actually." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing first her wedding band, then the diamond ring he had given her that morning. "I love you, Deanna Parker. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that for the rest of my life. And I love you, Jackson Parker. Always." The years continued to roll past, bringing changes and challenges. Joseph grew into a strong, capable young man who took on increasing responsibility for the ranch. At 18, he was essentially Jackson's partner, managing cattle operations and making decisions that shaped the ranch's future. He was quieter than his father, more contemplative, but he had the same dedication and work ethic. Grace, at 15, was a force of nature. She could ride better than most of the ranch hands and had an uncanny ability with horses. She wanted to break and train horses professionally, an unusual ambition for a young woman, but Jackson and Deanna supported her dreams. This was the frontier, after all, where the old rules bent and sometimes broke entirely. Samuel, at 13, had discovered a love of learning that neither Jackson nor Deanna quite knew what to do with. He devoured every book that came into their hands and talked about wanting to go to college, maybe becoming a veterinarian. It would mean sending him away, something Deanna dreaded, but she was determined not to hold her children back from their dreams. The ranch had grown substantially over the years. Jackson had acquired adjacent land from neighbors who decided to move on, expanding their holdings to nearly 3,000 acres. The cattle herd numbered in the hundreds, and they had developed a reputation for quality stock that commanded premium prices. Tascosa itself had grown, though it remained a small frontier town. The railroad had come within 20 miles, making it easier to ship cattle and receive supplies. New businesses had opened, including a proper school where Samuel spent his days soaking up knowledge like a sponge. On a summer evening in 1893, 15 years after their wedding, Deanna stood on the porch watching the sun set over land that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She was 40 years old now, with streaks of silver in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting against the prairie sun. She wore a practical work dress, dusty from the day's labor, and her hands were calloused from work. She was a far cry from the desperate young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach all those years ago. Jackson came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. He was 43 now, his dark hair liberally sprinkled with gray, his face weathered by wind and sun. But his eyes were the same storm cloud gray-blue, and when he looked at Deanna, they still held the same intensity that had stolen her breath 15 years ago. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing. Just remembering." "Remembering what?" "How scared I was when I first came here. How certain I was that I was broken, unlovable, unwanted. How you proved me wrong in every possible way. You were never any of those things. You were just lost, and I was lucky enough to find you." Deanna turned in his arms, looking up at his beloved face. "Do you remember what you said to me that day by the creek?" "I said a lot of things that day." "You said that you wanted me, and that was all that mattered." "It seemed almost too simple at the time, too easy, but you were right. It really is that simple." "And that complicated," Jackson added with a smile. "Love is both the simplest and most complicated thing in the world, true, but worth every complication." "Absolutely." They stood together as the stars began to emerge, holding each other in the way of people who have weathered storms together and know they can weather more. The life they had built was not perfect. There had been hard times, arguments, disappointments, and losses. But through it all, the foundation of their love had remained solid. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Joseph was returning from checking the northern fence line, Grace riding beside him. They waved as they headed toward the barn to tend their horses. "They're good kids," Jackson said with pride. "They are. We did something right. We did everything right." Jackson kissed Deanna's temple. "Come on. Let's go help them with the horses, then have dinner as a family. These moments don't last forever." Deanna knew he was right. Soon enough, Joseph would marry the neighbor girl he had been courting. Grace would start her horse training business. Samuel would head off to college. The children who had filled their house with noise and laughter would build lives of their own. But for now, they were still a family unit, still together under one roof. At dinner that night, the five of them sat around the large table Jackson had built years ago. Samuel talked excitedly about a book he had read about veterinary medicine. Grace described a difficult horse she was working with, the challenge in her voice making it clear she relished the difficulty. Joseph discussed the cattle market and his plans for next year's breeding program. Jackson and Deanna listened, occasionally offering advice but mostly just enjoying their children's passion and engagement with life. After the dishes were cleared and the children had gone to their respective rooms, Jackson and Diana returned to the porch. It had become their sanctuary, this wide porch that wrapped around two sides of the house, offering views of the endless prairie in every direction. "You ever wonder what would have happened if that stagecoach hadn't come to Tascosa?" Jackson asked. "If you had gotten off at a different town, met a different person?" "I try not to think about that," Deanna admitted. "It's too frightening to think that one small decision could have changed everything. But you made the right decision. You came here, you gave us a chance. You made it easy. You saw me when I thought I was invisible. You wanted me when I thought I was unwanted. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable." Jackson pulled her close, and they slow danced to music only they could hear, moving across the porch in the starlight. "Best day of my life, the day you stepped off that stage." "Mine too," Deanna whispered. "Mine too." The years continued their inexorable march forward. Joseph married Sarah, a rancher's daughter from the next county, and they built a house on the northern section of the Double P land. A year later, they gave Jackson and Deanna their first grandchild, a boy named James. Holding her grandson for the first time, Deanna understood in a new way the powerful continuity of family, the way love passed down through generations. Grace surprised everyone by falling in love with a horse trader from Oklahoma, a man named Thomas who appreciated her skill and supported her ambitions. They married when she was 20 and set up a horse breeding and training operation that quickly gained a reputation throughout the territory. Samuel did go to college, studying veterinary medicine in Dallas. He came home during summers, full of new knowledge and ideas, and eventually returned to Tascosa to set up practice, becoming the first veterinarian in the region. His gentle way with animals and deep knowledge made him invaluable to the ranching community. Jackson and Deanna watched their children build their own lives with pride and, occasionally, a touch of melancholy for the simpler days when they were all under one roof. But they adapted as they had always adapted, finding new rhythms and new joys in this stage of life. On their 20th anniversary, Deanna woke to find Jackson already up and dressed in his best clothes. "What's going on?" she asked. "We're taking a trip, just you and me. I've arranged everything." "A trip? Jackson, we can't just, we can and we are. Joseph can handle the ranch for a few days. I'm taking my wife on a proper anniversary trip." Intrigued and more than a little excited, Deanna dressed in her best traveling clothes. Jackson had a wagon ready, packed with supplies and blankets. They drove south, following the road toward Amarillo, talking and laughing like they were young again. Jackson had booked them a room in the finest hotel Amarillo had to offer, a luxury neither of them was accustomed to. That evening he took her to a real restaurant with white tablecloths and multiple courses. Deanna couldn't remember the last time she had eaten food she hadn't cooked herself, and she savored every bite. "This is wonderful," she said over dessert. "But you didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did." "Deanna, you've spent 20 years working hard on that ranch, raising our children, making a home in the wilderness. You deserve to be pampered, to be treated like the queen you are." "I'm no queen. I'm a rancher's wife. You're my queen." Jackson reached across the table and took her hand. "20 years ago, I made you a promise. I promised to love you every day for the rest of my life. I've kept that promise and I'll keep it until my last breath." Tears pricked Diana's eyes. "Jackson Parker, you are the most romantic man who ever lived. Only for you." They spent 3 days in Amarillo, exploring the growing city, seeing shows at the theater, simply enjoying being together without the constant demands of ranch life. On the third night, lying in the comfortable hotel bed, Deanna turned to Jackson. "Thank you for this, for everything. For 20 years of love and partnership and joy. Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a rough cowboy with nothing but a dream and a small ranch. You were everything I needed. You still are." They made love that night with the passion of newlyweds and the deep knowing of long-married partners, and Deanna thought about how lucky she was, how impossibly, wonderfully lucky. The return to the ranch was bittersweet. Deanna loved her adventure, but she also loved her home, her life, the rhythms that had become second nature over 20 years. As they crested the last hill and saw the ranch house spread out below them, she felt her heart swell with contentment. The years that followed brought their share of sorrow along with the joy. Ruth passed away at 73, dying peacefully in her sleep. Deanna grieved for the woman who had given her a chance when she desperately needed one, who had become a surrogate mother and grandmother, who had witnessed and supported the love story that defined Deanna's life. Jackson's ranch hand Tommy, who had worked for them for nearly 20 years, was killed when a horse rolled on him during a roundup. Jackson blamed himself, though everyone assured him it was a tragic accident. Deanna held him through his grief, reminding him of what he had once told her. Some things were beyond human control, but there were triumphs too. The ranch continued to prosper. Joseph and Sarah had 3 more children, filling their house with noise and laughter. Grace and Thomas developed one of the finest horse breeding programs in Texas. Samuel's veterinary practice thrived, and he married a teacher from the new school, a smart, kind woman named Elizabeth who fit seamlessly into the family. Jackson and Deanna grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with years and weather. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of shared experience, tested and proven through trials and triumphs. On a spring evening in 1903, 25 years after Diana had stepped off that stagecoach in Tascosa, she and Jackson sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. There were 7 of them now, ranging in age from 12 to 2, and they ran and shouted with the boundless energy of the young. "We did good," Jackson said, his arm around Diana's shoulders. "We did very good," Diana agreed. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Jackson asked. "What's that?" "That woman in St. Louis who told you nobody wanted you. I wonder if she ever thinks about you, ever wonders what happened to the young woman she dismissed so cruelly. I doubt it. People like her don't think about the people they hurt. If she could see you now, see this life we've built, what do you think she'd say?" Diana considered the question. "I don't think it matters what she'd say. What matters is that she was wrong. You wanted me. Our children wanted me. Our grandchildren want me. I built a life full of people who want and love and value me. That's all that matters." "I do," Jackson said softly. "What? Want you, love you, value you. Just like I said 25 years ago, I do, and that's all that matters." Deanna turned to kiss him, this man who had seen her when she was invisible, loved her when she thought she was unlovable, wanted her when she thought she was unwanted. "And I want and love and value you. Today, tomorrow, and always." The sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The grandchildren's laughter rang out across the yard. Inside the house, Diana could hear Sarah and Elizabeth preparing dinner, their voices mingling with the clatter of dishes. This was her life, built from the ashes of rejection and despair, forged in the wild frontier of Texas, sustained by a love that had proven stronger than any challenge. As the stars began to emerge in the vast Texas sky, Jackson and Deanna remained on the porch, holding hands and watching their family. They had traveled a long road to reach this moment, faced obstacles, and overcome them together. The scared young woman who had arrived in Tascosa with nothing but a carpetbag and crushing weight of rejection was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth, who had built something lasting and beautiful. "You remember what you said to me that first Sunday by the creek?" Deanna asked. "I said a lot of things. You said you wanted to know everything about me, my favorite color, what made me laugh, what I dreamed about. I remember." "You know all those things now," Jackson smiled. "Your favorite color is the blue of the morning sky just after dawn. You laugh at our grandchildren's antics and at my terrible jokes. You dream about seeing all our children and grandchildren happy and settled, about the ranch thriving for generations to come, about growing old with me and watching more sunsets than we can count." Diana's eyes filled with tears. "You do know me, better than I know myself sometimes. 25 years together will do that." Jackson kissed her forehead. "And I look forward to 25 more, God willing, and I with you." The evening deepened into night, and eventually they went inside to join their family for dinner. The large table that Jackson had built years ago was crowded now with children and grandchildren. 3 generations gathered together in the house that love built. As Deanna looked around at the faces of her family, listened to their chatter and laughter, felt Jackson's hand in hers under the table. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. Every closed door in St. Louis, every rejection, every cruel word had pushed her toward the one door that was open, the one that led to this moment, this life, this love. She caught Jackson's eye across the table, and he winked at her, that same wink he had given her 1,000 times over 25 years. In that wink was understanding, partnership, passion, friendship, and a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. After dinner, after the dishes were washed and the grandchildren collected by their parents, after Joseph and Sarah had walked back to their house, and Grace and Thomas had ridden out to their ranch, and Samuel and Elizabeth had driven their buggy back to town, Jackson and Deanna were alone again. They prepared for bed in comfortable silence, the routine of 25 years making words unnecessary. When they finally lay down together, Deanna rested her head on Jackson's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Jackson." "Yes, love, thank you for finding me. Thank you for letting yourself be found." He stroked her hair, the gesture achingly tender. "Sleep now. Tomorrow's another day, another chance to build this life we love." Deanna closed her eyes, safe and warm in the arms of the man who had saved her from despair and shown her that she was worthy of love. Outside, the prairie night wrapped around their ranch, vast and wild and beautiful. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed softly. The wind whispered through the grass. And inside the house that love built, two hearts beat in sync as they had for 25 years, as they would for all the years to come. The years continued to unfold with grace and challenge in equal measure. Jackson and Deanna grew into their 60s, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but their spirits remained strong. The ranch had become a true family enterprise, with Joseph managing most of the day-to-day operations while Jackson oversaw the bigger picture decisions. Deanna spent her days tending her expansive garden, preserving food for winter, and spoiling her ever-growing number of grandchildren. She had become the matriarch of not just her own family, but of the wider community around Tascosa. Younger women came to her for advice, for her famous recipes, for her wisdom about navigating marriage and motherhood in the harsh frontier environment. One autumn evening, as Deanna sat on the porch shelling beans, a young woman approached the house. She was thin and worn-looking, carrying a small bag and wearing an expression Deanna recognized all too well: fear, desperation, and the defensive pride of someone who had been rejected too many times. "Can I help you?" Deanna called out. The young woman hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps. "I'm looking for work, any kind of work. I can cook and clean and sew. I'm a hard worker, I promise." Deanna studied her for a long moment, seeing herself in this girl's face. "What's your name?" "Anna, Anna Miller." "Where are you from?" "Anna, St. Louis originally. But I've been traveling for weeks, looking for a place that might have worked for someone like me." Deanna felt something click into place. "Someone like you?" Anna's chin came up defensively. "I'm 23 and unmarried. My parents died last year and I have no family. In St. Louis, they said nobody wants a woman like me around. Bad luck or something worse." Deanna set down her bowl of beans and stood, walking to the edge of the porch. "Come up here, Anna. Sit down and talk with me for a minute." Hesitantly, the young woman climbed the steps and perched on the edge of the chair Deanna indicated. 27 years ago, Deanna began, I stood in almost your exact position. I came to Tascosa from St. Louis with nothing but a bag and the words of a cruel woman ringing in my ears. She told me nobody wanted me, and I believed her because I had nowhere else to turn and no reason to hope. Anna's eyes widened. "What happened?" "I met a man who told me he wanted me, and that was all that mattered. He became my husband and we built this ranch together. We raised 3 children and now have 7 grandchildren. I've had a good life, Anna. A hard life, but a good one. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that what they told you in St. Louis is a lie. You're not unwanted or unlucky or whatever else they said. You just haven't found your place yet. Deanna paused. I can't offer you a job here at the ranch. We don't need extra help right now. But I can point you toward Ruth's restaurant in town. The woman who runs it now might have worked for you. And even if she doesn't, there are other options. Tascosa's grown over the years. There are opportunities if you're willing to work hard. Tears streamed down Anna's face. Thank you. You don't know what it means to hear someone say that. I know exactly what it means. I've been where you are. Deanna reached out and squeezed the young woman's hand. Life out here is hard, Anna. I won't lie to you about that, but it's also full of possibility. If you're brave enough to reach for it, you can build something beautiful. Deanna sent Anna into town with a letter of introduction to the woman who had taken over Ruth's restaurant after her death. Later, when Jackson came in from checking the cattle, Deanna told him about the encounter. You did a good thing, Jackson said, pulling Deanna into his arms. I just remembered how it felt to be her, how desperate and scared and certain I was that I'd never find a place to belong. And now look at you. You're the heart of this community, the person everyone comes to for advice and comfort. Only because you saw me when I was invisible, Deanna said softly. You gave me a chance to become who I was meant to be. We gave each other that chance, Jackson corrected. I was lost too, Deanna. I just didn't know it until you arrived. They stood together in the fading light, holding each other with the easy comfort of long familiarity. Outside, the prairie stretched in all directions, vast and open and full of promise. The years rolled on, bringing Jackson and Deanna into their late 60s and then 70s. They moved slower now, their bodies marked by age and hard use. But their love remained as vibrant as ever, perhaps even more so, deepened by decades of shared experience. Joseph took over complete management of the ranch, running it with the same dedication and intelligence his father had shown. He expanded operations, adding new breeding lines and implementing modern ranching techniques. The Double P became one of the most respected ranches in the Texas Panhandle. Grace's horse breeding operation flourished, gaining national recognition. People came from as far away as California to buy horses trained by Grace Parker Thomas, and she developed innovative techniques that were written about in agricultural journals. Samuel's veterinary practice grew to serve a wide area, and he trained 2 younger veterinarians to work with him, ensuring that the ranching community would continue to have access to quality animal care. The grandchildren grew up and started having children of their own, making Jackson and Deanna great-grandparents. The family gatherings grew larger and louder, requiring the big house to burst at the seams to accommodate everyone. On their 40th anniversary, the family threw a celebration that brought people from all over the region. The party was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside under a clear Texas sky. There was food and music and dancing, and person after person came up to Jackson and Deanna to share how their lives had been touched by the couple's kindness and example. Jackson stood to make a speech, his voice still strong despite his 70 years. 40 years ago, I met a woman who changed my life. She was scared and hurt and convinced that nobody wanted her. I told her I did, and that was all that mattered. It's still all that matters. Deanna, you are the love of my life, the mother of my children, the foundation on which everything good in my life is built. I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. Deanna stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, and addressed the crowd. I came to Texas with nothing but desperation and a slim hope for a fresh start. This man gave me everything. He gave me love, a home, a family, and a life beyond anything I could have imagined. To everyone here, never let anyone tell you that you're not wanted or not worthy. It only takes one person who truly sees you to change everything. Jackson saw me, and I've spent 40 years being grateful for that gift. The celebration lasted long into the night, with music and laughter echoing across the prairie. Jackson and Deanna danced together under the stars, moving slowly but surely, their bodies still remembering the steps even as their pace had slowed. 40 years, Jackson murmured against Deanna's hair. Feels like both forever and no time at all. The best 40 years of my life, Deanna replied. Every single day, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. Those are the days that proved what we're made of. They continued to sway to the music, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, by the community they had helped build, by the life they had forged from courage and love. The years grew shorter, as they do when life is measured in decades rather than days. Jackson's health began to decline in his mid-70s, his heart weakening from years of hard work. Deanna cared for him fiercely, refusing to acknowledge that their time together was drawing to a close. On a spring morning in 1923, 45 years after they had first met, Jackson woke in their bed with Deanna beside him. The sun was just rising, painting the bedroom in soft golden light. "Deanna," he said softly, and something in his voice made her eyes snap open. "I'm here," she said, taking his hand. "I need you to know something." "Jackson, don't let me say this, love. I need to say it while I still can." He took a breath, gathering strength. "You gave me the best life a man could hope for. Every day with you was a gift. Every moment we shared was precious beyond measure. If I could live my life over again, I wouldn't change a single thing because every choice led me to you. Jackson Parker, you stop talking like you're saying goodbye. I'm not saying goodbye. I could never say goodbye to you." He smiled, that same smile that had made her heart skip 45 years ago. "I'm just saying thank you for everything. For loving me, for building this life with me, for giving me children and grandchildren and more joy than any one man deserves." "You gave me all of that too," Deanna said, her voice breaking. "You saved me, Jackson. You saw me when I was invisible, loved me when I thought I was unlovable. Everything good in my life came from you. No, love, it came from us, from what we built together." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Promise me something, anything. Promise me you'll keep living, really living, not just existing. You've got years left in you, Deanna Parker. Don't waste them grieving for me. I can't promise that. Try for me." They lay together as the sun rose higher, hand in hand, hearts beating in sync as they had for 45 years. Jackson's breathing grew shallower, but his eyes remained fixed on Deanna's face, memorizing every line and curve one last time. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too. Always and forever." Jackson took one more breath, smiled at Deanna, and then he was gone. Peacefully, gently, slipping away as the morning sun filled their bedroom with light. Diana held him for a long time, unwilling to let go, unable to process a world without Jackson in it. Finally, Joseph found them there, and gently helped his mother release her husband's body, though her heart would never release his memory. The funeral was one of the largest Tascosa had ever seen. People came from hundreds of miles away to pay their respects to Jackson Parker, the man who had built a ranch from nothing, raised a family in the wilderness, and touched countless lives with his quiet kindness and unwavering integrity. Deanna stood at his graveside, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. 45 years earlier, She had been a desperate young woman with no future. Jackson had given her everything: love, family, purpose, joy. And now he was gone, and she had to figure out how to keep her promise to him, how to keep living when her heart had been buried with him. The months after Jackson's death were the hardest of Deanna's life. She was 87 years old, her body frail and tired, but her mind remained sharp. She stayed at the ranch, refusing Joseph's gentle suggestions that she might be more comfortable moving into town or living with one of the children. "This is my home," she told him firmly. "Your father and I built it together. I'm staying here until I join him." She spent her days tending her garden, visiting with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and sitting on the porch where she and Jackson had spent so many evenings. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, she could almost feel him beside her, almost hear his voice telling her about the day's work, almost feel his hand in hers. One Sunday afternoon, about 6 months after Jackson's death, Diana was sitting on the porch when a familiar figure appeared on the road leading to the ranch. It was Anna, the young woman Deanna had helped years ago. "Mrs. Parker," Anna called out, climbing down from her buggy. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Anna, of course not. Come sit with me." Anna climbed the porch steps and settled into the chair beside Deanna. She was in her 40s now, with threads of gray in her hair, but her eyes were bright and happy. "I heard about Mr. Parker," Anna said gently. "I'm so sorry. He was a good man." "The best man," Deanna agreed. "I miss him every moment of every day. I wanted to come thank you, again. You probably don't remember, but you helped me when I first came to Tascosa 20 years ago now. You gave me hope when I had none." "I remember." "Did you find what you were looking for?" Anna smiled. "I did. I got work at Ruth's restaurant just like you suggested. I met my husband there, a rancher named Thomas. Not Thomas from Oklahoma, who married my daughter Grace. No, Thomas Riley from the ranch east of here. We've been married 18 years now. We have 4 children and they're all healthy and happy. We have our own small ranch, nothing as grand as the Double P, but it's ours and it's good." Deanna felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so glad, so very glad. I wouldn't have any of it if you hadn't given me hope that day, if you hadn't told me that I was wanted and worthy, even when I couldn't believe it myself." Anna reached over and squeezed Deanna's hand. "Mr. Parker told you that you were wanted, and that was all that mattered. You told me the same thing. That gift of hope, of being seen and valued, it changes everything." "Yes," Deanna said softly. "It does." After Anna left, Deanna sat on the porch thinking about the ripple effects of kindness, how Jackson's love for her had spread outward to touch so many others. He had saved her, and in doing so, had enabled her to save others. It was a legacy every bit as important as the ranch he had built. Diana lived another 2 years, spending her final days surrounded by the love she and Jackson had created together. She passed away peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning, and her children buried her beside Jackson in the small cemetery outside Tascosa. On her gravestone, Joseph had inscribed, "Deanna Dawson Parker, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother." She was wanted, and that was all that mattered. The Double P Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family Jackson and Diana had created. The story of how they met, of Jackson's declaration that he wanted Diana when everyone else had rejected her, became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. Their love story became a beacon for the family, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the darkest moments, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that one person who truly sees you can change everything. In the house that love built, on the land that determination carved from wilderness, the legacy of Jackson and Deanna Parker lived on. Every sunset viewed from that porch, every meal shared around that table, every child born into that family carried forward the message that had defined their lives. You are wanted, you are loved, and that is all that matters.